Good evening and welcome. Our guest today has been in the game for 20 years, beginning his career as a coach at Crystal Palace. But it wasn't until 2010 that David moved over to the dark side and solely focused on player recruitment with Southampton. Since then, he has headed up recruitment at Bournemouth and then Spurs. And in October 2018, moved to Ostersunds as technical director. And the following year, he became head of ops for Huddersfield Town. I'm very excited to welcome David Webb. David, how are you?
I'm really good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. Not too bad at all. How much are you missing being inside the four walls of a football club?
Yeah, it's pretty strange at the moment. I think you get a little bit of like football depression being away from it, but obviously what's going on with current climate, it's unprecedented time, so frustrating. But there's a bigger picture out there as well, which you concentrate the health and safety of people first, and football will come back when it's ready to come back.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And I think that's the most important part. I think safety is paramount. Football has always been and always will be. So things like this can literally wait. But yeah. I suppose it makes people itchy and almost wish that it comes back sooner rather than later. Yeah. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of people out there who don't know as much about you as what I do. Maybe we could start at the beginning. What was your first entry into football back in 2002, wasn't it?
Yeah, it actually started sort of a year before that. I started off actually as a community coach at the old Wimbledon.
Wow.
Yeah, it was 2000. I think year 2000 I started that. So, and then sort of from there worked my way through to player development centres and academy coach, and then unfortunately the old Wimbledon as we knew it then sort of shut down. And I moved on to Crystal Palace sort of as a sort of academy coach for the under-10s, under-11s.
Wow. So right at the baby ages then.
Right at the babies, yeah.
I think I read a story the other day that you saw Zaha first. Any truth in that?
Yeah, there is. It wasn't in any sort of like mysterious scouting. It was actually I was the under-10 coach of Crystal Palace at the time. And my younger cousin played for a team called White Horse Wanderers, which was based in sort of West Croydon, sort of an unfashionable team, sort of in the C division. And he kept saying to me, look, there's this really good young player who keeps scoring loads of goals. So I said, look, when I get a Sunday off, I'll come down and have a look. So we had a game cancelled for Crystal Palace. And I went down and had a look. And then I see this young player, and he scored about sort of 6 goals. I was like, wow, who's this? So I spoke to the coach, and they had not just Wilfred, they had a couple of other interesting players there as well. It was just like a newly formed team, and there was a lot of what we call like the street kids.
Yeah.
So we took 3 of them in on trial. Wilfie went to the under-11s on trial, and he had a 6-week trial, and it was only on game 6. I think they actually, week 6 of the trial, they actually signed him because when he was training, he was so off the cuff. And the coach at the time, he said, look, he said, Dave, he kept finding me. He said, Dave, he keeps mucking up my sessions. I said, you put him in the game yet? He went, no, I ain't put him in. So then he put him in a game against Tottenham's under-11s, and he phoned me after the game. And he said, right, we're going to sign him. I said, why that? He said, he just scored 4 goals. So I was like, wow, okay.
You can't argue goals, can you?
No, and that's what he was. He was such a, even as a young player, he was so raw, but he had these raw attributes. He was quick, he was very skillful, he was dynamic 1v1, and he was just completely off the cuff, completely off the cuff. And he would do things where you think, wow, they're just uncoachable, unteachable.
Wow. So at that point, you were coaching at Palace, doing a little bit of scouting as part of the role.
I think you did. I was always interested in the blend of it, of coaching and scouting, because, and I think when you're sort of coaching games, you was always looking at other players. You're always looking at players, and I was always be interested to think, because Crystal Palace was in such a really good catchment area, like really good at the time, and I knew the areas that sort of I knew and I'd been from. I think there was a lot of sort of untapped talent and sort of like street kids out there as well that probably are not getting seen. So I'd be really interested. So if I didn't have a game or if I didn't have training, just to, I spoke to the recruitment coordinator at the time and said, look, if I'm not coaching, can I go and watch some games for you? Or I've know where some players are. So I sort of get to, I got to enjoy that just as much as the coaching.
Oh, well, really. whilst we're talking about that coach and that scout synergy, do you think being a coach helps with your scouting?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so now. And I think, working sort of all the way through as well gives you sort of, a deeper understanding, especially now when you're, if you're going to watch sort of like first team players. I think if you can understand the development process of where they've come from, have an understanding of the academy structures, then you get an understanding of, like, especially during the scouting phase, are they good? Are they going to be good learners? What areas have they come from? Which clubs have they played for when they're younger? So it gives you an idea of, because the sort of the coaching market in terms of the academy market, sort of in UK and Europe, you have an idea of where they should be, where they should be, sort of maybe sort of on their technical, tactical level, maybe physically as well. And then your next job after that is to sort of do as much homework as you can and find out about them as a human being.
Yeah, so I'm sort of reading through your history before. I obviously noticed that you worked at Palace, you worked at Spurs as a coach, and then you sort of moved into that head of coaching role with Millwall, and almost kind of what it seems maybe sidestepped that recruitment side for a period of time. What was the thought process behind that?
I think then it was, I was still very young, and I hadn't sort of quite decided which way I wanted to go with my career. Whether I wanted to, because I was sort of getting, I was enjoying the scouting side, and I did more of that when I went from Palace to Tottenham. I got to do a little bit more of sort of older age group recruitment in the academies. So rather than sort of Palace, I concentrated from sort of the 9s to 12s. At Tottenham, I worked up to sort of under 18 level. So that gave me an idea to do, I really enjoyed that. So I think for me, it was to get more of that experience, more sort of in a full-time role, and maybe sort of like some leadership experience and management experience. And it was a good opportunity because I knew the area, I knew Millwall, and I knew the scope it had as well, especially being in the catchment area, was the type of players that you could recruit into the system, and also develop the ones that was already there as well.
Yeah, and I think obviously following from there, you moved to Southampton, which was then, I take your mainstay role in recruitment in terms of where you're based in Point.
Yeah, that was that was really good, because again, it was a sort of a stepping stage, sort of up a little bit more from that, because I had a little bit more responsibility in terms of sort of like coordinator role for sort of London. It was sort of basically from sort of anything from under 15s through to sort of 21s that had sort of that elite level. And then we got the opportunity to start sort of like getting abroad and watching more sort of European under 17s, under 18s, under 19s tournaments of all across Europe. And I was really hungry for that, because I was really sort of thirsty to learn. And I was always fascinated with sort of our clubs in terms of their structures and the players they had and how differently things were. So the opportunity to scout, at that level, which was still quite early on in my career, was really good. Yeah,
I think a lot of people can relate to a journey where they've got to a point where they've maybe done the lower age academy, and then the more senior age academy, and then I suppose it then happens where does that transition go when you can jump into the first team action? Because I know when I first started in scouting, I did a lot of the younger ages before I went to the 18s and what would have been the 21s or 23s at that point. And then it was how do you make that jump from the 23s to the senior recruitment, which always seems to be the apple of most people's eye, and obviously you managed to do that quite swiftly, really.
Yeah, it was, and I think at Southampton that gave me the opportunity to do that as well, because I think sometimes you would go to you double up on your game, so you'd maybe go to an under 16s, under 18s game on a Saturday, and then maybe sort of coincide that with a first team game, still looking at maybe a sort of potential young talent for a team of a player that you thought you might be able to acquire. And the same in Europe as well. So if you say, for example, you've been to Holland or France and you've just been to a long tournament, if there was first team games in the evening as well that had sort of good potential players that were on your sort of team's radar, they would get the opportunity to double up. So you sort of just started to sort of creep into that sort of first team a little bit during that period.
Yeah. Now to flip it around and go sort of from backwards. Obviously, in summer of last year, you joined Huddersfield. What was it that attracted you to the club?
Huddersfield, I think it was, I was really excited for a club like Huddersfield because you could see the potential of the club. It just sort of come down from the Premier League. It had a really healthy sort of squad of players. It had, done fantastically to get to where it had, and it was going in the right direction. And when I initially spoke to the sort of former CEO Julian Winter and the sort of current owner now Phil, and so we had a sort of first meeting, I was excited with what their plan was, how they wanted to sort of take the club forward, what their plans were for the future, and also there were sort of like roles that sort of coincided with my strengths. So they wanted to bring academy players through. They wanted, they didn't want to go out and try and buy their way back up to the Premier League. They wanted to do it steadily. They wanted their own philosophy, their own values, and they wanted someone to come in and sort of help sort of drive that and sort of lead that forward.
Okay. Now, I suppose there's almost quite a close synergy between the roles at Huddersfield and also Ostersunds. Between both of those roles as a combination, what would these normal jobs sort of entail? What would you normally do on a day-to-day basis? What areas did it cover?
Yeah, I think in these roles, I think they're different from each, from club to club, of how they set up and how they see the role sort of working for that particular club. So, for example, in Ostersunds, it was Ostersunds quite a small club, sort of in the north of Sweden. So, you didn't have as many departments as you'd have. We have sort of say Huddersfield, for example. So it was more, I think, with Ostersunds, it was more having that close relationship sort of with the first team manager and the staff, and that link with the owner, and sort of the recruitment of players sort of transferring in and out, and again sort of recruiting into the values of what Ostersunds is as a football club. I think that was very important, that my expertise sort of fitted in with what they wanted at the time. And the same with Huddersfield. I think you have to have, when you look at these roles and you look at your strengths, you have to sort of coincide with what can you bring to this particular role, what are your strengths, what you've been asked to do here. And I think if you think you can deliver to the levels that's required, I think then you give yourself a good chance of success in those roles.
So we're stuck in the middle of a transfer window. You're at XYZ club. What would a normal day and week look like for you?
Oh, depends what week it is. Depends what transfer window is. So say if you look at the January market, I don't really like the January market, to be honest. I think it's a reactional market. It's dependent on where your position is in the league. If you're trying to if you're in a championship club, for example, if you're trying to achieve promotion, avoid relegation, or just consolidate, or even in the Premier League, you're going to pay a lot more money if you want to try and acquire a player, because no one's going to want their best players to go. And if you do lose a player, then it's going to cost you double to replace him. So you're always playing catch up in those markets, and it seems more frantic in that short space of time. And you find that, unless you go into that fully prepared, that you're only going to do this amount of business and you stick to your plan, that's fine. But I think that sometimes those sort of markets especially the January market, can be sort of very misleading. It's a very, very, it's clubs panic in those markets. I think my day to day would be depends on how much work you've actually got to do. So on transfer deadline day, that can be absolutely frantic, because you can have X amount of players that want to get out. Bids have come in for your players that you weren't expecting, and there's sort of decisions to make. But I think you've just got to sort of, as a club, be sort of strong in your position, your philosophies of what you want, unless it's a ridiculous offer that you think is going to beneficial you in the long run. Then I think the idea is to try and stick to your plans and your process as much as possible, and not get caught up on the whirlwind of it. Which can be easy, right? Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy. You can get very emotional about it. You win, you get players, you lose players. Things change at the drop of the hat. Players change their minds. Situations change last minute. And I think you just, my experience now, I think you just get used to that, and you kind of accept that that's going to be it in the market. That's the way it is, and not and not try and get drawn in on the emotional side of it, and just try and stay calm and do the job your best you can, because there's so many uncontrollable factors that are beyond your control in that position. So you just have to accept that, I will do what I can to maximise and tip the odds in the favour for my club. And, hopefully if we can do what we need to do, then great. But we have to accept there's going to be some unpredictable times as well.
What's your idea of like an excellent scouting structure to you?
Yeah, I think that differs from club to club. And I think the perfect way to do it would be if you had sort of total alignment for your club. So if you had total synergy across, the whole spectrum, and that would be from the owner's core values of how he sees the club, what he wants the club to represent, sort of the manager buying into that, and you as a sporting director sort of making sure that sort of departments and all the way down is filtering through. So you'd have sort of a system in place where, when you're recruiting, it doesn't matter if you're recruiting for sort of academy to the first team, you're recruiting to the same sort of values and the same sort of processes. So you've got sort of total alignment, and you'd have, ideally in an ideal world, you would want staff that, a group of staff that obviously buy into that. So, you want them to recruit to what's needed for your particular club. So in terms of your structure, it's, can be, I think as long as you've got that alignment, that would be sort of your perfect structure.
Yeah. So let's say with the structures in place, there's like a working ethos what you'll sort of fit to. What can you tell me about the recruitment process? So let's say you have a target. What steps do you go to in turning that target into a potential acquisition that will go into your depth charts? Let's say you're at Bournemouth and you need a number 9 and Callum Wilson at the top of that list. What does that process look like?
I think as well, with someone like Bournemouth, with someone like Callum, he was same as Tottenham's, and not to say that the other clubs weren't like this, but it was all about detail. Because when you're recruiting for Eddie Howe or Pochettino, you're recruiting for sort of real manager, coach, developers. So you're looking at players that that ideally are going to improve your team first and foremost. But you're also looking at, can they go on and become real assets for your football club? Because have they got the capacity to do that? Because if they come into these environments, they are going to be developed, a lot further. So it was detail with Callum Wilson. So he was watched X amount of times, like quite a few times by all across the scouts. He was, we done our stats work on him, which with the stats program which we had at the club, and that would be comparing them to what we got, comparing them to the current market, to what's out there, to availability. That's they had to coincide with sort of the data of how we read it, because it might be completely different to how another club would read it. And then we had to do all our homework as well. So the background was key for us as well, to find out as much as we could about Callum as an individual, as a player, because to recruit into for someone like Eddie Howe, the dressing room is like is sacred to him. So to bring a player into that dressing room, he wanted someone that's going to enhance that atmosphere, going to be be good to that environment, that can bring, obviously not bring goals to the club as a number 9 and what he can do on the football pitch, but also what he can bring into the environment. So that we always found was kind of the hard work that we done behind that, because the footballing side, we had, once we identified him as a target, we was happy with that. It was the other work to make sure that he would be sort of that perfect acquisition, as to tip the odds in their favour that we wanted.
Yeah, I suppose it's always a risk when you bring a new player on board. How do you ensure when you've actually made that acquisition that the onboarding process is right?
Yeah, and I think you have to have that that transitional period, that settling in period as well. So I think for someone like Callum, where we'd done all our homework, so we understood what his needs were and his aspirations and his expectations were of us as a football club, as much as we were of him. So, and they were quite similar. So in terms of what he wanted in his footballing journey, we was equipped to sort of provide that. So we had that information to hand. So it made his transition into the football club sort of quite smooth, and he adapted quite easily. So in terms of, he was happy with the area, he was happy with the location, he was happy where the team was progressing. At that time when we took him, we was on our way, to winning the championship. So the team was in a really good place, and Bournemouth, is a beautiful place to live. So, he's thinking of starting a young family in the future. So you got to take all them things into consideration as well. That's a nice place to bring up a young family. So all those other points sometimes that go outside of scouting, because the settling in period after it, the expectations can always be, especially if you're going to pay X amount of money from a club like Bournemouth. I think Callum was all over nearly £2.5 million, and that's a lot of money to a championship club. So you've got to make sure that both sides fit equally as much as you can to make sure that transition goes as smooth as possible.
Is that the same to say with loans coming in and also managing the ones that go out?
Absolutely, yeah. At the end of the day, with football players, you're managing human beings as well. So we treat loan players coming in, they've as much as sort of a signing coming in. So if you're looking at a loan player who's going to come in and you want him to enhance your squad or give competition or whichever, what your rationale is for bringing in a loan player at that time, you have to make sure that that he fits with what you want, and you have to make sure it's understanding his aspirations as well, because usually with loan players, the most important thing to them is sort of game time. So, you can't guarantee game time every single week, but you have to guarantee some sort of game time, during that period, and you guarantee, you can guarantee that sort of you're going to, improve them if they're a young player with the current coach, and when they do go back to their sort of ownership club, that they're going to go back as a better football player and a better sort of more rounded individual.
And talking about youth players in particular, how important is it to promote the youth players into the first team? And what steps have been taken to ensure they play a part in the club?
Yeah, I think it's very important, and I think the academies are sort of the livelihood of clubs. So, and now the culture of your football clubs, and I think it's important that your program sort of coincides, as much as you can of what the first team's doing, sort of all the way through. So when they do, say for example, someone like Tottenham, Pochettino could quite happily call under 16-year-olds to train with the first team. So, but he had a really good relationship with John McDermott. So, and my sort of role in between was sort of that transitioning role. So, when players were ready to step up, they were, obviously the level was going to be sort of far superior to them. There was a lot of things in place that were made sure that transition in terms of the footballing, the style of training wasn't too dissimilar to what they was undertaking at their level. So when they do eventually transition into a first team environment, and if they're looking to bring through one of your own, that them differences, are not too far away. So it does make that, that period of transition a lot easier.
And obviously we've seen a lot of movement from youth players moving away from their parent clubs. From what it seems, not thinking they're going to get opportunities. What can you do as a club to help make sure they actually stay?
I think is that you have to give them the right environment, and I think you have to show a pathway, a clear pathway that each year, say for example, that you is going to have maybe one or two players from your academy that's going to go, going to get the chance to train and develop in that first team environment. Obviously, there's no guarantees, but if you was to do that sort of year on year, and even if it didn't turn out that they didn't go through to your first team, that they can be developed for someone else's first team. And I think all the time you're showing that development pathway, that you're making them first team ready, hopefully for your team, but if not, good enough to be for someone else's. And then so you have to maybe sell that player to another club, then that can go back into your academy, so you keep that development circle turning. So I think for young players, as long as they can see sort of that clear pathway through and that passageway, I think it gives them, that opportunity, and it will create that competition that you need.
Yeah. Now, as part of your role, you helped appoint the Cowley brothers What was the thinking regarding that appointment? Do you have a vision of how you wanted Huddersfield to play and wanted to find someone who could deliver it? Or did you look for someone whose style of play you admired?
No, I think with that period of time, I think it was sort of how the club it was driven a lot by sort of what the current owner see his football club as. So what the values he wanted from his sort of manager and coach, and what style of play he wanted to implement, and what type of sort of coaches, managers that he wanted in that environment. So we went down the path of sort of like the young British coaches at the time to sort of follow on from sort of the German coaches we had previously. And it was just felt at that time that maybe Huddersfield coming back down to the Championship, that given an opportunity to an up-and-coming young British coach within that elite environment to sort of work, that sort of tailor our thinking towards that. And then you look at the current market of young potential coaches out there. There's some really good coaches out there. And I think Danny and Nicky we liked, lots of things about them. They'd earned their stripes at lower league. They'd done really well all the way from Concord through to Lincoln. They were forward-thinking coaches. Sort of they came as a duo, which was pretty good as well. So obviously knew we would get in sort of like double bubble from both of them. And I think their values fitted in well, because they had done a lot of outside work in terms of Lincoln, sort of building the community, a lot of stuff in schools and stuff like that. And Huddersfield was a real sort of community-based sort of family club and had good values. So I think that was also a good fit as well. So when we looked at the footballing side and looked at the other sides, they were, they seemed to be sort of an obvious choice in the end.
Yeah, and what sort of role do they play in terms of recruitment?
Yeah, they like to be active in it. In terms of like their style of play and players that they like. I think Huddersfield as a club want to, have sort of people fully involved in the recruitment process. It's sort of maybe from the owner, sort of it was myself, now will be Lee Bromby, Danny and Nicky, head of recruitment, and sort of head of that small team. And so when it comes to that decision making, when it comes to signing a player, that core leadership group is all happy with that particular signing, and they're happy to proceed with that. So I think it's and everyone's got a role to play in that.
Okay. Now you've worked at quite a few different clubs across quite a wide spectrum. Out of all the people you work with, who has inspired you the most and why?
Difficult. I would say in terms of managers and coaches, I would probably say in terms of how they work, probably because I liked them as not as just as top class coaches at the time, but really good people as well. So I'd say Eddie Howe and Pochettino were, probably really good working for them to see how they operate on a daily basis at the levels they were working at, because they're both under pressurized conditions. They were both very, very good coaches, very good managers. Probably Poch is probably, you could argue, sort of a world-class coach, but I think it was them as people, how they dealt with people, how their leadership, and their inclusion of everyone. And it was for me, looking from afar, when you're recruiting for people like that, it becomes not easy, but it becomes more like you feel more satisfied when you've got it for them, because full well that what you've personally recruited, it's just a small bit of the jigsaw puzzle. Then they just take that product and finish it off and polish it off, and that as people and as coaches they can do that to a high level.
Yeah. Now I'm not touting, but if you want to hire a scout, how do you help them become an asset to you and your club?
I think when you're looking at depending on how your particular club is set up on the scouting process, I think if you I think you've got to make sure that that the scout is sort of on board with what your values are as a club. So if you're, you expect a scout to have good football knowledge, to have good scouting knowledge, and then you're looking at other skills they might possess that can be, that can be of value to you. And then what's their network, which is key. But I think is the most important thing for them is they buy into what you are as a football club, and they understand what it is that you're recruiting, and bringing that area of expertise into your environment. I think that's one of the key things you would have, because it's no good. There's some excellent scouts out there, but their ambitions or their vision might not be the same as yours. And you've got you're trying to find the best possible players for your club, so you want potential scouts to buy into that.
Yeah. Now, often people speak about experience being the best teacher, but for those lacking in it, what would you say is the best advice from an aspiring scout or coach who has his or her eyes set on becoming a director of football or a technical director?
Yeah, I would say is you've got to be a good learner. So, and you've got to be. For me, it was quite. I never knew that I wanted to be a sporting director. My journey sort of changed a little bit, maybe 6-7 years into it. So I think it's having a few strings to your bow. So, if you are a good recruiter, then maybe develop another area. So I did a master's in sports psychology because I wanted to understand more the performance side to a elite level. And I had a coaching background, so I knew those two would help me in my journey on the way up as well. And when I was in periods when I wasn't in football, I was willing to go out and put myself out and travel and go and learn from clubs, across Europe, from different businesses, and really learned, because I think it's, the more knowledge you got and the more learning you got, the better equipped you're going to be to get to your onward goal. And I think it's also important as well that you've got to understand the football industry, that it's really competitive, and it's ever changing. And I think you as a human being have got to accept that, that you're not going to get. I mean, in the early stages of my career, I must have gone on about 10, 11 interviews and didn't get any of them. So it's not, and you've got to have the strength to carry on, and not beat yourself up about it, and continue to learn and look at yourself and your process and think, right, how can I develop? I might not have had the skills for this particular role. I might need more of this or more of this. So I might need to develop myself in more of this, and then I think you evolve. You evolve over years, and not to rush to get there, because it's quite an intense role. So make sure you're ready for it and that you've gone through the right journey to get there.
Okay. Now, lastly, what do you think are the key skills a good leader needs?
I think you've got to be. One of mine was you're only as good as the people around you. You're only as good as your team. So, you can't, especially now in the modern day football, you can't micromanage every little bit around you. Like in the early part of my career, you'd want to micromanage everything, because maybe that trust wasn't there from other members of staff and stuff. So I think delegation now has become key for me as well, having good trusted people in really good positions that you can rely on to do their job, and that you're not don't have to keep looking over their shoulder, that they're going to do their job to a very high standard. And I think it's it's like you want to set high standards, but you want to make sure that people are empowered. I think empowerment's a big thing now, to give people more responsibility so they can learn and grow, so they don't become stale in their role. So you're giving them new challenges to do, them new journeys, them new stuff to learn as well. Because if you want to keep good people around you, you've got to keep them hungry and motivated. Because it's very competitive. Because you don't want them to lose them to rivals. And so I think it's about empowerment, it's about delegation, it's about setting the standards and do things that if you're asking someone to do something, you don't ever ask them not something you're not going to do yourself. So you've got to set the tone.
Yeah. David, thank you. That's all we've got time for today. Let me end by saying thank you and for your time, and also the days leading up to this event. It's been really valuable to myself to learn from someone at the very top of your game. Thank you very much, David.
No problem at all. No problem.